do that all the time and buy things. I just figure it's the Russians trying to get in.
So Saint Alban. So I was looking at, we're doing the Anglican Saints, and when I first wrote this, I decided to do it in chronological order. And so we're starting with Saint Alban because Saint Alban's the first actual known Christian martyr from the British Isles. And still trying to get my controls working here. Hang on a second. Okay, well, let's see. Sorry, having trouble with my controls. Anyway, the first few saints will be shorter presentations because not as much is known about them, obviously, when you go back that far in time. Saint Alban, like I said, was the first known Christian martyr of the British Isles, and he started life as a pagan, like most people did back then in the was probably the 3rd century. He was living in a city called Verulamium. At that point, the British Isles were under Roman rule, so very Roman name for the town, Verulamium. The town is now called St. Albans. Yeah. Still having trouble with my controls. There we go. All right. So shortly after, the story behind St. Alban is shortly after his conversion to Christianity, he allowed himself intentionally to be mistaken for the priest who had converted him. And St. Alban had been showing him some hospitality when people came looking for the priest. Roman guards coming to kill him, the priest, because this was the era of time when Rome was persecuting Christianity. And Alban took on the priest's robes against the desires of the priest, and to his surprise, he just did it very rapidly, and then fooled the Roman guards into thinking he was the priest, allowing the priest to escape. And St. Alban was taken by the Roman guards as assuming he was the Christian priest, which was illegal to be a Christian, particularly to be any kind of clergy. And so the guards and emissaries came to the house and found Alban and took him under custody. And he was dragged before the judge and scourged, and still refused to deny becoming a Christian. The tragic part of the story is a few days later, the priest was actually, they saw through the ruse. They got 2 Christians for the price of 1. The Romans did. And they found the priest a few days later, a few miles down the road in a town called Redbourne, and stoned the priest to death. So in spite of St. Alban's heroic efforts, he didn't really save the priest for more than a few days. St. Alban himself was condemned to death by beheading. Of course, there's going to be miracle stories associated, especially back in the older days with these saints. And supposedly on the way to execution, he stopped the course of a river so that he and his executioners could cross. He also caused a fountain of water to flow on the summit of the hill that he was beheaded on. And then later in time, St. Albans Abbey was founded on that site near the British city of Hertfordshire. Oops. And legend has it his executioner was converted on the scene and refused to carry out the sentence. And the man who replaced the original executioner.
Oh my gosh.
After striking the fatal blow, was struck with blindness, with his eyes falling out of their sockets.
Oh gosh.
Gosh.
Well, that's grim.
I know, right? Traditionally believed to have died in 304 Common Era, but some of the dates are disputed. It may have been 209. So either way, making him the first British Isles martyr.
That's a big difference in timeline.
Yeah. Well, you know, the records just weren't kept as well way back then. And, you know, we know he lived, and that was commonly thought it was around 3 or 4. And not that long ago, there were some other older references made to him that were definitely older. So they're pushing the date back. Historians are pushing the date back. He has a feast day that's recognized by the Anglican, Catholic, and Orthodox faiths. And he's remembered along with Julius and Aaron, who is one of the 3 earliest martyrs of the Roman British Empire, the Britain part of the Roman Empire. What happened in 1968, there was a historian named John Morris who found some writings by a Caesar, by Emperor Septimus Severus in 209, wrote about the story of Alban. So that's pretty much pushed the date back on when he lived. Now we're going to talk about Bede later in this series. Bede was a famous historian, the earliest historian of history of the British Isles, and Bede was not aware of these manuscripts. So a lot of what we got prior, when we thought St. Alban was in the 4th century, was from Bede. But he found this, so Morris found these writings saying Alban received a fugitive cleric, put on a garment and his cloak, and was wearing, and delivered himself up to be killed instead of the priests, delivered immediately to the evil Caesar Severus. This is what Morris found in the writings that push it back to 209. So that, I find that interesting, to the first Christian martyr of the British Isles all the way back to 209. I mean, that's not that long after the time of the apostles, really, you know.
Nelson just noted the brown cloak in this illustration.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, like the saint's symbol, icon or something, normally they would carry whatever
Interesting.
identifies them. So that brown, you can see, is not as decorative and beautiful as the outfit that he's wearing in this particular illustration. So possibly whenever he's depicted, there would be a cloak or something in that dark color like the priest would have worn.
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder if that goes back to the early date of the.
Well, it was typical that in all of the illustrations of saints, they would provide something for the illiterate who knew their stories to be able to identify to whom they were praying or, you know, looking at or whatever.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
that dark brown looking undecorative cloak makes me think of, you know, the cowled priests, you know, wearing plain clothing.
Interesting.
Maybe he wanted to play for the Cleveland Browns.
So in the 14th century, King Edward III made St. Alban the patron saint of England, which you know now officially it's St. George, and the cult of St. Alban was further advanced by King Henry V in the Battle of Agincourt in northern France. So for several centuries, St. Alban was considered the patron saint of England, being the first Christian martyr from the British Isles. But Shakespeare had made, you know, there was some people want St. George to be, and St. George wasn't even from the British Isles, but there were some some efforts to make St. George the patron saint of the British Isles, and Shakespeare helped solidify that in one of his plays. In the play King Henry V, when some character cries out,
St. Albans Day.
"Mary, England, and St. George," and so that kind of propelled the push locally for St. George to be the British patron saint. But even as recently as 2006, there were clergy from the Church of England proposing Alban should be replaced back again as the patron saint of England. And honestly, I never heard of St. Alban until I started doing this, looking for information for this talk. Naturally, supporters of St. Alban being this patron saint of England say that he's better attested as he was a martyr, and George's legend is more mythical and not associated with Britain. St. George's, there's a story about St. George slaying a dragon, and some of these stories do have a mythical sound to them, so who knows which are mythical and which aren't, right? So there's a cathedral, St. Albans Cathedral, stands over St. Alban's grave. And as all the way back to antiquity, there's been many, through the years, centuries, have been many churches and even a monastery on that site. We don't really know for sure all the churches that have been built on that site. But there's a town around that area named St. Albans. King Offa of Mercia, the kingdom of Mercia, back when before England was a united kingdom and there were multiple kingdoms across the British Isles, the central part of England was the kingdom of Mercia, and the king of Mercia founded a monastery there in 793. So there has been this continuous cult following and honoring of St. Alban in that area. After the Norman invasion in 1066, William the Conqueror appointed this Paul of Seine to be the first abbot of St. Albans, commissioned a new church. And he rebuilt the abbey, and including the tower, which is still standing. The Norman church had used bricks and tiles from the ruins of the Roman city Verulamium. It was completed in 1155. Only English pope that we had was Adrian IV, who was born locally in this area and was involved with the abbey. Interesting bit of history in 1213.
Magna Carta.
Yeah, meeting place for churchmen and nobles, where they discussed the Magna Carta, which was reluctantly sealed by the king. Of course, naturally a place of learning, as abbeys and monasteries were back then. And the monks produced many Bibles and books on science, music, and classics. Back before we had printing presses. The abbey was closed in 1539. Most of the buildings were destroyed. And that's when St. Alban's relics disappeared, which happened to a lot of relics in England when the Reformation happened.
What is the supposition of all these stolen relics?
You know, most cases nobody knows. They're probably destroyed, thrown into the sea. There was a.
What would you consider a relic?
Usually that any item previously owned by that saint or any parts of their body. So clothing, a staff that they walked with, jewelry, but most primarily, you know, their bones. Those are, so, you know, the older traditions of the church with saints is to hang on to their bones. And like someone mentioned last week, we took you know, the Catholic Church still today in their altar will put a small piece of a relic from the saint that the church is named after and embed it into the altar. And so that's what relics are. Usually bones, but it could be, you know, if they had a scepter that survived, or a robe that survived, portions of that are also considered relics. And they would put them in the whatever, where they had shrines to the people, they would often be there. And during the Reformation in England, there was so much push to be not Catholic, not Roman Catholic, that anything that looked Roman Catholic was destroyed and done away with. That, and King Henry VIII wanted to sell things off to make money for his wars. He's had wars on 3 fronts. So unfortunately, a lot was lost in that time. St. Alban is also honored sometimes outside of England. In Switzerland, there's an Albana Fest, largest annual festival in the Swiss town of Basel, St. Alban. They even have the town partly named after him.
Let's go.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous.
Isn't it beautiful? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I think it's a Hilton hotel there in the background on the left.
It could be, right?
You can stay in the monastery.
That's not the Motel 6. Is it?
That's where I belong.
You get a cell.
St. Albans in Louisville is Bardstown Road at the Snyder. I guess there's a Catholic church out there, sort of the White Castle out there. Everything's in relation to White Castle.
That's how you find your way around town, huh, bud?
Yeah.
Yeah, White Castle and Dunkin' Donuts.
Krispy Kreme. I haven't been to Dunkin'. Anyway.
Sorry about that, Krispy Kreme. Okay.
So there is
It'll happen again.
There's a Fellowship of St. Alban and St. Sergius as a religious organization founded in 1928 to facilitate contact between Anglican and Eastern Orthodox Christians.
Sergius.
Who was Sergius?
He's
about Sergius?
Orthodox saint. With a name like Sergius,
Okay.
certainly Eastern European. I'm not sure who it is actually. But that sounds like a Romanian or Albanian type name.
Yeah, we had a dental student named Sergius, or however you pronounce it.
Yeah. Was he Eastern European?
I never asked him.
What was the
He was
Eastern-
too busy learning. What?
Was he Eastern European?
I don't know
or
from
had-
where he came.
Did he have an accent?
No, he had no accent. He was U.S. born
Oh,
and
okay.
raised.
Washington National Cathedral in D.C. is located on Mount St. Alban. I have no idea. Oh, and that's it for St. Alban. That's all I have.
There is also a St. Albans in outside of Laramie, Wyoming.
Is there really?
Yeah, we were members of the cathedral in Laramie, which is called St. Matthew's. And periodically throughout the summer, different parishioners would go out to this area in the wilderness in the mountains, which is a campground. And they would conduct Episcopal services for whoever was camping there at the time at St. Albans. So it was like a little adjunct church in a way up in the mountains, but it was open amphitheater type thing with an altar. So that name was familiar to us from.
Interesting. And did you go out? You went out there then?
We were not out there at that time, but they talked about it, and it was providing church service for campers.
Oh, interesting. How long were you in Wyoming?
Well, how long was that?
5 or 6 years.
Oh, wow. Seems like such a remote, desolate place to me.
Well, it was a college town, so
Oh, okay. Okay.
the local newspaper would list how many were arrested from the saloons on the weekend.
Looking for news.
Those weren't a picture day, I'm sure.
The population would double when the university was in session.
I imagine. population of Wyoming probably doubled.